This is a popular talk. Well, at least it's a popular subject. You may be throwing things at me by the end of this. I'm not sure. So we'll see. Okay. Perl's worst best practices. So my name is Daina Pettit. My email, I work for Bluehost, and so I have two email addresses. My work email address at bluehost.com, and then I have my personal, which is dana@xmission.com. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my biases, so you kind of know where I'm coming from here. I currently work for Bluehost, which is a larger endurance international group company. That group is actually a hosting conglomeration. I used to work for Linux Networks, Silicon Graphics. We did supercomputers. Ingenix, Optum, United Health Group, we did medical information. Evans and Sutherland, we did high-performance flight simulators. Novell, Unixware, Unix System Labs, we did poor management. And I've worked for a lot of others as well. My geek code block, if any of you remember the geek codes, for those of that you don't, I will interpret that, and that means that I grew up on BSD Unix. I strongly prefer Linux. I don't prefer Windows or Microsoft at all. I've been doing Perl since '94. I've been doing Emacs since 1990, and I've been doing C since '82. There's a lot of other things I've been doing, but those are the main things. Now, this presentation has a lot of opinion in it, so just be aware that I may be completely wrong. You may be right, but you may be wrong also. So we all may be just clueless noobs and have no clue what's actually going on, but just be aware that we'll throw that out right there. So our overview, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what the best practices actually means, and then we're going to go over a summary of the Perl Best Practices book. And then we're going to talk about what the worst stuff is, in my opinion. And you may have your opinion as well. We'll talk a little bit about Perl Critic. Perl Critic was talked about this morning, so we don't need to go into much depth on that, but we'll talk a little bit about it in terms of best practices that we're going to be covering. And then at the very end, we'll go to questions, answers, and rants. So if you have your own favorite worst best practices, let us know. So why do we have best practices? Well, the whole idea with best practices is that we want to make our code more readable, we want to make it more reliable, we want to make it easier to maintain, all things that we would think would be good things. So anything that makes our code less reliable, more buggy, that sort of thing, we consider that a bad practice. So we want to get away from those things. So the best practices is an attempt to help us get away from those problems. There's another point of view, and that is the legal point of view, in that best practices, following them, may save our skin. And of course, then there's the required Dilbert. So hopefully we are not mediocre. So the book, Perl Best Practices, all of you have probably seen this. Some of you have actually read it. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, and we'll talk not about the really good stuff so much. This was published in 2005, which means it was written over the years prior to that, so it's actually older than just, 12 or 10 or 11, 12 years old. It's a little older than that, actually. The author is Damien Conway. I didn't have his picture, so I used a picture of Leonardo. And in his book, Damien says, remember that each piece of advice is a guideline. Whether or not you agree with all of them doesn't matter. What matters is that you become aware of the coding issue these guidelines address. And this is actually very important, because what this book actually does is it points out the issues we need to address. What are the things that we need to be aware of? The little gotchas, things like context. When you think that you have a scalar context, it may turn out you actually have a list context. These are important things to know about. So this book helps us with that. So we express thanks to Damien for raising the issue, for actually publishing the book. It is a lot of work to publish. If those of you that have ever published a book realize how much work it actually takes. And I appreciate him defending his Perl best practices and then changing his mind when it needs to change. Sometimes our best practices do need to change. Libraries change, languages change, tools change, our hardware changes. And so sometimes things that used to be good are no longer good anymore. And so the best practices have to change with that. So the best practices book being over 10 years old, back then Perl 5.8 was popular. Who's still running on Perl 5.8? Less than a handful. When I started, I was on Perl 4, and there was no best practices out there. And I still have systems I go on that have Perl 5.8 on them. It's the latest thing that we're allowed to have on that particular one. Most machines now, I think, are up to 5.10 or 5.14 if you're kind of running a legacy system. I don't know very many people that are running on 5.22 or anything newer. So let's look at an overview of the book. There's some dispute as to actually how many. There's either 255 or 256. The book claims 256, another list claims there's 255, so I'm not going to worry about exactly how many there are. But there's 18 groupings, and you can see the kind of groupings we have. We have things like code layout, naming conventions, values and expressions. The first part of it tends to be stuff that's stylistic issues. Things like, how many spaces do you have? How do you tab? Do you use spaces or tabs? A lot of these kind of things. Then there's stuff that's very Perl specific. Things like how you do references, regular expressions, object-oriented stuff. There's a lot of that kind of stuff in there. And we're not going to cover all these. We're just going to cover some highlights. And by the way, if you want a Perl Best Practices quick reference guide, this is available from Johan Vromans. You can go to this link at the bottom, or you can just Google the Perl Best Practices Quick Reference Guide, and you can get this as a PDF. It's 2 pages and has a summary of all the Perl Best Practices. So let's look at first what we can ignore. There's 163 items of the 256 that are general good programming practices that are applicable to any language, not just Perl. So a lot of these are discussed elsewhere in forums and books and so on. We don't need to talk about those much here, so we're not going to. Many of these are also style issues, your indenting, your brace pairing up, that sort of thing. We don't care so much about that here, and a lot of those can be automated and may be specific to a particular site, so I'm not going to worry about those. If you are concerned about some of those stylistic issues like formatting, code layout, you can use Perl Tidy. And those of you that have not used it, it automates your code layout. You basically give it a bunch of rules, and then it will go and it'll not change your Perl code. It changes your Perl spacing and indenting, basically what it does. So you can customize it to your particular look. You can invoke it within an editor like VI or Emacs. You can also have it implemented automatically with a source code management system, something like CVS or Subversion. There's a whole bunch of them that'll do that. So when you check code in, it automatically converts it to the correct format. And if you're really picky and you don't like working in a particular style that your company's chosen, you can have your own Perl Tidy that converts it back to your particular style. This is actually rule number 22 in the book: enforce your chosen layout style mechanically. Perl Tidy has problems, though, in that if you're picky about columns, like your hash fat commas lining up, the equals greater than, it will probably mess those up. So just be aware that there is that particular problem with Perl Tidy. It's not real good with some of those kind of things. It's really good with the first thing on a particular line, getting those lined up right. And sometimes it's a little difficult to get those to work exactly right. So just be aware that Perl Tidy is one thing that you can use to solve some of the stylistic issues. So really what we want to talk about here, there's 92 items that are Perl specific. These are what we're going to focus on, but we don't have time to go over all of them, so we're just going to talk about a few of them. So let's go ahead and dig right in. The first grouping, values and expressions, there's 18 items. We're just going to whine about one of them. Don't use bare words. Number 45. Now, bare words are when you have essentially an unquoted string, and Perl has to figure out what to do with it. And by default, it will try to make it into a string, but there's times where the context is such that it says, oh, this might be something else. This might be a function call or a subroutine call. And so it tries to make that into a call. And so sometimes you end up with a misinterpretation because of that. So to avoid that problem, you say use strict subs, and that solves that problem. However, my whining about this isn't about this particular part. It's just the title is misleading. Don't use bare words, because really, what we really want to say is that bare words are okay. We just don't want to get them showing up as subroutines. So an example of where we can actually say use strict subs and still use bare words is in the initialization of a hash, or referring to a key in a hash. So in the example, the colors hash here, we have green and yellow as our hash keys. We don't have to quote them. We could, but we don't have to. And it's still okay with use strict sub. So we really should have have the rule renamed something about avoiding bare word subs rather than just avoiding bare words entirely. The next one, documentation. There's 14 items. We're going to whine about 2 of them. And this one I can actually go either way on. These 2 are, one is keep all your user documentation in a single place within your source file. And then the other is keep all your pod documentation at the end of the file. Now, I don't mind having it at the end, but it seems to me that scattering it around can create problems or not. The rationale that Damien uses, he says scattering user documentation amongst code tends to lead to inconsistent and outdated documentation, meaning you forget to update certain things. And so if we put it at the end, it's together, but it's out of the way of the code as well, so you don't stumble over your documentation trying to find your code. I had a coworker once who brought some documentation. He brought some code from another company where 98% of the lines in the file were documentation. There was 2% that was actually code. It was hard to find the code. So I can see why it would be important to have the code right up front. But on this one, I can go either way. I could say, yeah, I can put it all at the end and group it all together, but I kind of like having all the subroutine documentation with each subroutine. So when I modify the subroutine, I will change the documentation there. But in some cases, some people may not like that, and they may forget to update the documentation. And I kind of don't like having it all in one place at the end because it's far away from everything, and I usually end up missing something. But having it all at the end and as one group makes it more consistent. So I kind of go either way on this one. I'm not real bothered by a lot. However, this next group bothers me a lot. Regular expressions. There's 24 items. I'm going to whine about 5 of them. Always use the X flag. Damien's rationale for using the X flag, by the way, the X flag, for those who are not deep into regular expressions, allows you to put comments and white spaces inside of your regular expression patterns, which means that spaces and pound signs are ignored. So his rationale is that large, complex regular expressions will need comments, and that's probably true. And that regular expressions always grow, so you're eventually going to need to have this anyway. And don't set a minimum size. Just start at whatever you have. Always use X, so you're always going to be ready for the expansion. And I say nonsense. Large, complex regular expressions might need comments, but they do not always grow. And most regular expressions are fairly small. They're 20 characters or less. And the number of times I've had regular expressions grow is almost 0. Once you write them, they're done. I just don't see them growing. And one of the big problems is the X flag doesn't just ignore white spaces, it also ignores the pound sign. So if you have pound signs in your regular expression, it's going to change the way your regular expression is evaluated. So that is bad. But the biggest hang-up I have with the whole thing is every time I run into a flag at the end of a match or a substitute, I have to think, why is this flag here? What are they expecting in the regular expression that I need to have this flag? And when there's a flag there that is not used, it bugs the heck out of me. So for example, if somebody's looking for punctuation characters and puts an I at the end, ignoring case. Why? Why? So this is just one of those that it takes me longer to read the regular expression code if there's an X there, because I have to figure out why it's there. So my conclusion is that we should only use X when it is actually needed. I find it takes an order of magnitude longer for me to read the code when it has unneeded modifiers there. The next one, always use the M flag. Now, the rationale is that people mistakenly think that caret and $ mean beginning and end of line. And that we need to use M to change the regular expression's meaning so that caret and $ actually mean beginning and end of line. Nonsense. Learn the language. $ and pound sign mean beginning and end of string, with $ sometimes meaning a carriage return. So it'll match either a carriage return or the position at the end of the string. The M is rarely needed, and it really only makes a difference if you have embedded new lines in your string. And new programmers rarely have embedded new lines in their strings. They're usually doing line-based input. So if they have a new line, it's at the very end. And in addition, just like the X flag, it takes longer to read the regular expression if there's an M there. Conclusion, learn about how the language works. Only use M when it's actually needed. I think you can see a pattern here. Always use the S flag. Everyone seems to think that dot means any character, and it does not mean any character. It means something else. But /s will make it mean any character. Using the S is nonsense. We need to learn the language and realize that dot means any character except new line. And when we're on a different operating system, it will change to the appropriate meaning of what a new line means, whether it's a new line character, or a line feed, an explicit carriage return, or both. In addition, this one is also rarely needed, and it only makes a difference if we have embedded new lines in our string. And again, noobs rarely have embedded new lines in their strings, and if they do, they're at the end. And it takes us longer to read the code because it has the S there. The conclusion is learn about what S actually means, what dot actually means, and use S only when needed. Now, if you combine XMS, which is what is recommended, it actually slows down your execution by about 3%. It depends on some other factors, but it actually slows your code down slightly. It's not significant, but in particular performance applications, it might be enough to make a difference. But it significantly slows the reader's understanding, and that's one of the things that we should be more concerned about. In addition, it can break existing code. So when the Perl Best Practices book came out, I had a coworker that was excited about this stuff. And he said, I'm going to go put XMS on all our regular expressions. So he took our code base and did that, and it broke everything horribly because it changed what things meant. So he apologized and he took it all out. Another one I don't like, Regular expression autoflags. Consider mandating it, forcing everybody to have XMS without it actually showing up. That is sinister. Don't do this. I hate hidden settings, things that you have to dig for to find out what the real thing is going on. It can be harder to debug until you realize that the RegXP autoflags is what's going on. Please don't pollute with this stuff. Bad idea. Next one, don't use any delimiters other than forward slashes or the curly braces for our regular expressions, operators. The rationale is to be consistent, and I can appreciate that, and to don't be cruel. The cruel was the Harry S. Truman thing in the book, if you saw that example, where you could use a letter, a character that's a letter, to be a delimiter. That's bizarre. I don't know why anybody would do that. That would be considered being cruel. My complaint about this is that braces are seriously overused in Perl. We use them for lots of different things. We don't need yet another thing. And we're not going to be cruel. We're going to be having to come back to this code later, so we're not going to make it cruel. If we want to be cruel, there's lots of other things we can do, especially with Perl. So the conclusion on this one, use delimiters that make sense for that particular regular expression, which might be the curly braces. But it might be vertical bars, it might be pound signs, it might be percent signs, it might be some other character. I've seen just about every character that's a punctuation character used. And in those cases, they usually make sense. Now, there's since so much time has passed, Damien has actually changed his mind on some of the rules, the best practices, and so I'll talk about a little bit of those. And this is one that I actually agree with, that I didn't agree with when it came out initially. Used 78 column lines. I've been using 130 or more column lines for 20 years. So I'm kind of surprised he was saying limit us to 78 columns back 12 years ago. That was kind of odd. But his recommendation now is use whatever limit works for you. He recommends maybe 120, but didn't really say that's really a hard limit. I suggest no limit. You should do what makes sense for you. I actually suggested that to a coworker, that there should be no limit. They wanted to have a limit on the number of columns, and I said, I don't see a reason to have a limit. We've got 2 screens. Why can't we run an editor across the width of 2 screens if we need to? I don't think we would much, but sometimes you want to have something really wide that the format works well. I said, why should you put an arbitrary limit? He got really upset. But I just thought that we didn't really need to set a hard limit, and chances are if you set a limit, somebody's going to break it. Now there's some of the modules that are now kind of obsolete. There's better ones that have replaced them. Damien's recommendations. So he used to recommend attribute types. Now type tie instead. We used to recommend base. Use parent instead. Class standard util. Use object inside out. Moose or moose x inside out, or dios. The thing is, inside out is kind of fallen out of favor a little bit here. I think Damien thought that would take off, and it really hasn't. So I'm kind of torn on this. So, and I don't know if I can say it to this group, but I really don't like moose. The problem that we have at where I work with moose is the performance hit on startup is so slow. It's just unacceptable for the kind of work that we're doing. And previous place that I worked, we had we pulled in moose, and we thought, oh, this is cool. Look at the cool stuff we can do with moose. It hardly even looks like Perl anymore. And all of a sudden, our RPMs took forever to build. And so we decided, maybe that was a bad idea. Now, performance issues are supposed to be improving at some point, but right now, I personally am not ready for that, to use something quite like moose. Contextual return, object result instead. Instead of data dumper, which is still okay, data dump has no object-oriented overhead, and so it's a little bit better. And then dprof, devel dprof, I'd use that a lot to demo to people how to profile, and then I found NYTprof, and I'm surprised that dprof has stuck around so long. NYTprof is so much better. And thank you, Tim, for writing that. I haven't seen, is Tim even at the conference? No? Okay. But he was here a couple years ago. And anyway, NYTprof is awesome. So if you haven't used it and you need to profile, use that. And by the way, the summary of Tim's talk from 2 years about NYTprof is don't use it. And the reason why is you shouldn't be profiling unless you actually need to profile. And rarely do we actually need to profile. In my experience with profiling is usually the thing that you weren't thinking about is the thing that needs to be optimized, not where you think the actual bottleneck is. You're usually wrong. So we should be using fatal, AutoDie instead of fatal, and IO prompter instead of IO prompt. Parse RegDescent, there's some alternatives there that can help us a little bit more, although parse RegDescent is still good. RegXP, grammars, and MARPA. Perl 6 export adders, use sub-export or exporter tiny instead. Exporter simple if you like the Perl 6 type stuff. Const fast instead of read only. Was never a big fan of read only anyway. There's a lot more that Damien has changed his mind on some of these things. I don't have time to go over all those, and I think I'd put all you to sleep. If you want more information about those, you can go to Perl Even Better Practices by Conway, and I'm not sure how you can even get that. I have a copy here that was given at a presentation he gave 3 years ago, and I think it's self-published, so you'd have to talk to him to see where to actually get that. However, Damien has done a very smart thing, and that is that he's released a set of videos through OReilly that you can watch for modern Perl best practices, what it's called. And the nice thing about this is that he can update it periodically. Oh, Leonardo. Okay. So he can update it so he doesn't have to worry about things getting out of date so much and looking a little bit stale. So that's actually kind of nice. Let's look at Perl Critic. Perl Critic is a static code analyzer. It doesn't modify your code. It's usually invoked as part of your source code management system, something like through Git or Subversion, CVS, and so on. It can be also invoked by some other systems like Hudson or some of those kind of things. It has in the 143 rules in the base, or I should say the core Perl Critic distribution, and you can add your own rules. However, what's interesting is it only covers 66 of the 256 Perl Best Practices book. And only 33 of the 92 Perl-specific items are covered by Perl Critic. There's really no way to automatically cover all the Perl best practices. I mean, how do you get Perl Critic to automate something like, don't be clever? I don't know how you do that. So there's really a lot that they cannot do. So only 46% of the Perl Critic rules are actually Damien's, or based on Damien's rules. The other 77 rules are contributed by others. At first that really bothered me, because I thought, somebody else who has no authority, as if Damien has authority, somebody else who has no authority is making up rules for whether my code is good or not. And some of these are actually really good rules, and some are somebody's opinion, so you get to pick. So the nice thing about Perl Critic is it really isn't there to be the hammer coming down and enforcing rules, although it can. its real purpose, and along with the Perl Best Practices book, is to make aware of the potential problems. Where are the things that we can run into that are a problem? And it gets us to start talking about them on our development teams. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, what I've seen happen with Perl Critic is it gets automated as part of the source management system and then ignored. So one place I worked, we had the Perl Critic would take a score of our code, or each particular module, and then it would record that score, and then the next time we modified it, it would compare it against the previous score. If we got a worse score, then it would complain, and the build would fail. And we didn't like that too much. Especially when you're walking out the door, you check in your code and you're walking out the door, and all of a sudden the build fails, and you get a call saying you broke the build. Yeah, we had people in India that would be basically stuck until the next day, until we could fix the build. So that was a problem. So generally, what ends up happening, like where I'm currently working, we use Perl Critic, but it's advisory only. It never stops anything from completing. But most places I've ever worked, if we use Perl Critic, we ignore it. Only in the one case where it was killed builds did we actually pay attention to it. But its real value, just like the real value of the Perl Best Practices, is to get us to talk about these things and to realize what the issues are. That's the real point of this stuff. So do we have any questions or rants? Yes?
If your source files are 80 characters wide, you can have more split vertically across your screen. You asked for rants.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Columns are die. You need more than 80 columns.
Yeah, who needs more than 80 columns? Well, usually the person that's working on your code is you in 6 months, but not always, not always.
4K monitor solves it all.
A 4K monitor? As I've been getting older, I find my glasses aren't quite good enough. I used to have these itty-bitty fonts, things like under the old, this is more than 20 years ago, where you could specify the size of a font or the font actually saying 5x9. Yeah, you remember those days? Yeah, so you'd have these itty-bitty characters, and boy, I could fit a whole ton of stuff on a screen. I loved it. But that was before dual monitors and all that. Yes?
Earlier we were talking about where to put documentation on, whether it's all jammed at the bottom or interspersed in your code. There is a happy medium, like anything else that can be solved. More tooling. There's a piece of software, I think, Rick Signes wrote called Podweaver, and it can be used as a processor for your pods. So if you have stuff, interspersed in your code if you like, but on actually building something for release, it will take all your pod and consolidate it down to the bottom of the
So it'll throw at the bottom of the file for you.
for when you're actually releasing stuff.
Oh, okay. So for release purposes, you can do that.
So for release purposes, you can put it down at the bottom, but while you're working on it, you can keep, specific method call documentation and stuff like that.
And what's the name of that again?
It's called Podweaver.
Podweaver?
Yes. And
That's
a lot of, oh my gosh, that's something.
that.
That's one of the things that I use for.
That's cool. I like that idea.
It also messes up your line numbers.
It messes up your line numbers?
If you move all your pods to the bottom, there are plugins, what,
Yes, sweet.
there are plugins for what it'll do, and whether you care to does or not, it takes the pod that you have interspersed in your main code base, and it'll actually put comments in front of it, so it's line numbers
Okay. Good idea. Yes, Steve.
Why would you assume, if you want to put all the documents in the pod into the server, why do you always assume that the best order for documenting these things is the same order that you include them in the source code?
Oh, not necessarily, no, of course not.
But then if you include the pod into the server names, it requires you to define the server names in the order you want those documents, which may not be the best way to maintain them. Because at that point, a lot of times it's a lot better to separate the documentation and put it in a separate file. Because then it's a lot easier to maintain.
At that point, yeah.
Yes.
This is sort of tangential, but you mentioned that Moose made your startup too long. Did you try any of the lighter weight workalikes like Moo or Mouse?
We did not play with those. It wasn't that important to us. It was when we implemented the Moose stuff, it was more as an experiment to see how it worked, just to try it. And we didn't like the way the code looked that much, and being heavyweight startup, we just thought, it's not worth the bother right now, so we just dropped it at that point. And I think a lot of places did that. Where I work right now, we actually are forbidden to use any of that stuff, even the lighter weight, just because of the startup performance hits we have, because we have so much running on so many different systems. This is a big issue. Okay, like 2 rows from the back. Yes, you.
I'm really curious what you were doing when the startup time was, it actually mattered. Because it seems like you said you were a blue host, right?
Yeah.
So if your stuff's all hosted, don't you just spin it up and keep it running or report or anything?
Oh, we have a lot of tricky stuff we do. Yeah.
Disclose too much, I'm a dream host, so.
I can't say too much, actually, but we're using Perl to basically manage a whole bunch of servers and virtual servers, and the hit, if it takes 20 seconds to start up a script, that's way too long. If it takes 2 seconds, we might be able to live with that for certain things, but other things, that's too long. It just depends. Yes.
So on the YAPCNA YouTube channel, there's a talk that Matt Trout did where he talks about Moo and talks about how his primary goal of Moo was to defer that startup expense to runtime.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody's curious and wants to know more, that's a good place to look.
Even at runtime, it's only invoked if you're mixing.
Right, only if you're hitting the code
So
path
if you
where
don't
you
use
need it.
Moose at all,
Yeah.
you don't even get it then so much.
Yeah.
If you can't read through the whole book, best practices all in one setting, because I couldn't, I shoved the best practices into my Fortune file on my machine, so I get and then I can go read that section if I don't know what it's talking about.
Good idea. Yes, in the back.
So I'd just like to ask this question while I'm in a room full of smart people that care about best practices. Is there any way by now to make Perl Tidy align, say, hash initializations? Is that still a limitation? Is there some replacement or plugin somewhere on CFAN?
It's a lot better now.
It's better?
Yeah, we use a limited Perl Tidy. We've got Perl Tidy RC, but we only use it for new code or before we edit it. So we actually have scripts so that we can apply the Perl Tidy to just one function at a time. And we've been able to get it pretty good for our very strange ways of
But does it
playing.
handle alignment?
The alignment usually works. There's still going to always be edge cases, but right now it's pretty darn well.
Yes, right.
There's one option, the Perl Tidy, the indent only, which will do all your white space and just indentation. Leave everything else alone, which I like to use sometimes.
Yeah, good options, good options. Anyone else? More rants? More questions? Anyone want to berate me? Okay, go ahead.
I'll do it in your man. I've been following a lot of the Perl practices since it came out in 2005. So if you force me to learn what the dot and the dollar sign really do, I'm going to have my head explode when I try to read remix. So now I'm going to learn that.
there's that part of the process that, yeah, we have to retrain if we're going to do something a little different. That does create problems. Yes?
I wanted to thank you for pointing out that this is an evolving thing, that best practice one year might be a bad practice another year, because that's very important when a company or a group or a project walks in a coding standard. If they refuse to ever change it, then they are just going to fall behind the class. And I want to thank you for making that point, maybe not as detailed as it is.
Well, thank you. And that's, I think, one of the big things that everybody should come out of this with is that best practices are a recommendation, not a rule. And that they change. And they need to change. Yes?
Some people know me and know my position quite well on this, but the thing that got me when PDP first came out was the prohibition against postfix notation, which I find extremely useful for lining up dies or early exits out of the subroutine at the same indentation as most of the other code. It's just more obvious that you're doing this. And I found it interesting yesterday when I was watching Damien's talk that he uses postfix notation now. I didn't see you say, I didn't hear from you about it. And I'm thinking, you probably like postfix notation yourself.
I go both ways on that. Sometimes I think it makes perfect sense, and other times I look at it and I'm going, what in the world? It just depends on what it is, and I tend to not like unless and until. I keep having to translate them in my head into if not or while not. Because I think most of us are not used to that. We're used to just if and while. It takes some getting used to with some of these things. And
Postfix unless is a hand because a lot of times I use a carte blanc unless something is true. Like carte art missing unless defined art.
yeah, and that makes sense. And Perl was designed to read like English so that it would make sense. Problem is most of us don't think that way all the time. So that makes it takes some getting used to. Yeah.
One thing I've done I feel it makes it more readable is I'll put the if or unless on the next line tab in once, and it tends to catch your eye more than when it's hiding on the far end.
Oh, so you indent the if or the unless on the next line.
On the next line. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Especially the 130 lines. Not so much age.
Yeah. Oh, right here.
You mentioned the basic calls out of the RegXP default flags.
Yes.
The idea that the less you have to keep any context when you're reading code, the less hidden configuration. My mind is getting older and not so much room for all that context anymore.
That's a really good point. The more stuff you have to keep in your head, the worse off you're going to be. So, yeah, that's a good point. Yes.
You said in your first description, some of this might be controversial, and that some of it is, but I think you made really good choices for really the worst things, the questionable things at least. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? We got a couple more minutes. Okay. That's it. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Appreciate everyone's comments.